So the Community Energy Plan, the plan officially launched in January 2010, and with that, it was noted here as officially launched because it's important to note that leading up to the actual project, there were a lot of discussions with, at that point in time, our vice chair, who was going to become the chair of our county board in January 2010, and understanding sort of his vision and what he'd like to accomplish during the year that he was the chair of our county board. So staff were heavily involved in discussing everything from a full-blown, larger sustainability climate action plan all the way down to what we finally landed on was the more focused community energy plan, just focusing on the energy aspects and greenhouse gas emissions reductions and other things I'll be talking about that are inherent in the plan itself. The first phase was about 18 months from January 2010 into May of 2011 was when a task force report got approved, and then thereafter we finalized the actual community energy plan and implementation framework. So all told, by the June of this year, that was 3.5 years to go through the whole process. A lot of hand-holding, a lot of stakeholder involvement, which I'll talk about, but all very worthwhile. It was a county-funded project, and I also mention that because I do know of some other communities that have been able to use ARA funding and other funding from the outside in order to go through and create their plans, but the county committed funds that it had in-house to go ahead and to develop this. So not only staff time, but also funds to have consultants come on board and to assist us with some of the more detailed analysis. And lastly, from the get-go, this plan was noted as being going to become the newest comprehensive plan element. We are, like many other communities, we have a comprehensive plan with standard elements such as general land use plan, master transportation plan, and so forth, but there was nothing in there regarding sustainability or energy, and so from the start of this, it was noted that our plan would end up being a new comprehensive plan element. There's a rich history in Arlington County, which I'll talk about a little bit later in regards to the methods for choosing goals, but the AIR program was launched in the county back in 2007. That's the Arlington Initiative to Rethink Energy, and then also since the 60s and 70s, a long history of dealing with smart growth, which once again is more land use and transportation planning focused, not energy focused. So think of the energy plan as adding another layer onto an already existing successful framework for community planning throughout the entire county. The county is rather small. It's of the order of 26 square miles. So we are blessed by that in many different ways. We could talk about that when it comes to energy mapping on how we are able to move forward and think about things like district energy. But in this next slide, this is regarding establishing the baseline scope and framework. First thing you need to do in order to progress is to establish a baseline. You have to measure where you are in order to proceed forward. And so that baseline we did do prior to the community energy plan, and that was based on 2007 numbers. Then we had to decide what was the scope of our community energy plan. Was it going to be just government facilities, or is it going to be a community-wide plan? And also, if we chose to be a community-wide plan, which we did, given that the Pentagon is here, National Airport is here in Arlington County. We also have another joint base of Army and Marines here in the county. Are we going to include those facilities, those federal facilities, in our either inventory or in our plan? And so we made a decision to cut it such that the federal facilities in our goals statements and moving forward in our inventory, they were not included in those two. We did make that decision based on the idea that Arlington County only has so much power to make changes in those federal facilities. So they are partners. They work together with us. We're in regular communication with them on what we're interested in doing and trying to pair up what we're interested in doing with what their interests are. But we are not including them officially in our numbers for the inventory or in our plan itself. Then also getting to, as Kim had mentioned before, sort of an elevator speech. The last part of this slide and the next slide gets at that. there is a framework that we, from top to bottom, that we work toward to say, how do we prioritize how we deal with energy on into the future? And so the first thing is energy efficiency. Tackle that first, because regardless of what sort of technology you have in your building, be it a district energy system or renewable energy systems on the building, they are only going to be as cost effective as the building is when it comes to energy efficiency. So you want a very energy efficient building to start off with, and then thereafter, if you add renewable energy to it, it's going to make that renewable energy system that much more profitable, and the payback's much more much improved compared to a building that's not very energy efficient. So that's the first thing we want to tackle, and then is in our plan. Heat recovery, we call that district energy essentially in our plan, and that is noting that currently when we flip on the lights here in Arlington in any buildings, we recognize the electricity comes from a power plant that's a few hundred miles away, and in that power plant they're not using the heat that's produced when the electricity is created. And so that inefficiency is heat that's being lost, and it takes your efficiency of your overall system to around 35%. With our plans, we want to ramp that up to 80 to 90% by recovering that heat and actually using it for heating and cooling of buildings. Renewable energy, you likely know a lot about that already, so adding that on is sort of the third tier of our plan. And then lastly, diving into heat recovery and where the distribution makes the most sense. Think about energy use intensity. Think about where the greatest amount of energy is used in your locale and in your jurisdiction, and you create that district energy system to take full advantage of those areas that have the highest energy use intensities. Now, once again, people will ask, on the street or in the elevator, what is your plan? What is the community energy plan? What is it trying to do? And from the beginning, the first task force meeting that we had of our community leaders, we simply said it's about economic competitiveness, it's about energy supply and security or resiliency, and it's also about environmental commitment. And it is important for us to keep on reminding people that we make our decisions regarding energy as we look through those three different lenses simultaneously. And this became very important as we were leading up to the final days and hours before the county board meeting this past June. The business community really wanted a shining spotlight shown on economic competitiveness. And so even though we've said it during the last 3.5 years, we had to go back to this sort of slide and further highlight that economic competitiveness was a core value as part of the plan. And that's also very important because the business community was part of and an integral part of our task force. And this is a picture of our task force. It was 29 members strong. And with this task force, we had community leaders, people who affect change in the organizations that they are in. And these are developers. These are the leader of the hospital, the local hospital, the civic associations, and so forth. These are community leaders that rallied around the idea of developing this plan and are at center there. One of the co-leaders of this group, Jay Fazette, was the chairperson for the county board. He was the influential champion, let's say at the county level, the highest elected official at the time, to go ahead and to champion this effort. It was very important because he reached out to those task force members before they became task force members, and he said, I really want to do this and I want you on board. And it makes it difficult for them to say no. So having that sort of support, not only from him, but all of our county board members, they were fully in support of this plan and of this effort. Those community leaders, I can't stress enough the diversity of them in terms of all the different types of organizations that they cut across. And so private sector, public sector, nonprofit, community group leaders, they were all at the table talking at the same time, talking about the same topic. Utility groups, so our gas and our electric utilities were also at the table. And what we did is we created a charter, made that a public charter, everyone could see it, establishing the expectations and letting people know what their roles and responsibilities were as a group. So this task force, and this is during phase 1 of our project, they actually wrote the report, or our consultants with staff working together with our consultants formed the technical review group and working group. We created a report, issued it to this group. They looked at it, wordsmithed it, offered recommendations on changes, but at the end of the day, it was this task force that ended up sending the report and recommendations off to the county board. So in the roles and responsibilities, it was given to this group to go ahead and to issue that report. And I'll explain why that's important as we move into phase 2 of this project. This group was also given the option of steering or guiding the technical work group by saying, do you want a plan to be incremental? So meaning just business as usual with some improvements here and there over the coming years, or do you want to make it transformative? And we define transformative for them as being at least a 50% drop in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. And they, to a person, all raised their hand and said, we want to be transformative and go make a plan that does that. So that was very important, and that was the second meeting of this task force where we established that, and that allowed us to go ahead and to do the modeling that was needed to move forward. This slide talks about how choosing goals, and this was lifted from the earlier slide that was presented. And so I just want to make note that Arlington County, when I looked at this list, I found it a very useful and interesting list. I think that we did all these things as we went ahead and chose our goals. For instance, under Emulate Others, I know Guelph here, which is a suburb of Toronto, Canada, they had, just before us, created their own community energy plan. And so we had the opportunity in working with our consultant, Peter Garforth, and his team, who had worked on the Guelph plan, to understand some of the lessons learned from Guelph, and then he applied those lessons learned to what we were up to. But in addition to that, we also emulated others in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. The county had already signed up for the U.S. Mayor's Agreement on Climate Protection, as well as the Cool County's Climate Stabilization Declaration. And so those things preceded, as part of the AIR program and so forth, preceded this community energy plan. So this was a natural evolution. This plan would simply go ahead and continue that process of striving for those greenhouse gas emissions reductions, which we had already signed up for. Copenhagen, Denmark was sort of our shining star on the hill, if you will. We looked at them as having much less in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per year, per capita per year, than Arlington County, and we saw them as a worldwide leader. And so that helped us to go from what was our inventory at 13.4 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per capita per year in our 2007 baseline and find a number that we thought was going to be worthwhile to strive for. At the end of the day, when we went back to the task force with the draft report, we had noted that our 2050 goal would be 4.5 metric tons, and that was in comparison to Copenhagen, which we said was 3.0. The task force turned around and said, no, we want to be as good as Copenhagen is now by 2050. And so they actually intensified the efforts and they dropped the goal down to 3.0. So that was an interesting process that took place in late 2010 and into 2011. The EU best practices, we had a lot of effort brought over from Germany and a lot of best practices with actual district energy systems, for instance, happening over in Europe. We want to take those best practices and apply them to what we're doing. So, for instance, there are a number of steam-based district energy systems scattered all throughout the U.S., 80 plus in cities, and then a few hundred at universities and campuses all around the country. But those are steam-based. In the EU, they chose now to go with hot water because of a lot of benefits to that, not only with operations and maintenance, but just overall productivity. And so those are the types of best practices, for example, that we brought over and incorporated into our planning process. Arlington County, whether it's in smart growth, bicycle sharing, or whatever it is, we strive to be a leader and to kind of be out there and on the cutting edge, and so this was another opportunity for us to go ahead and do that. And so the leadership priorities was reflected in us establishing that plan. The Northern Virginia Regional Commission linked us together with Germany using what was called the Transatlantic Climate Bridge, and also offered opportunities for us to understand what's being done in other parts of the world and take those best practices and further apply them to Arlington. And so that regional sort of effort was something that we were piggybacking off of. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, smart growth and the AIR program were both part and parcel of Arlington County's evolution of how it tackles sustainability. And this community energy plan was a continuation or an evolution of that process. So how are we going to reach our numeric goals? And during the modeling process, once we were told to create a transformative plan, that set our consultants and technical work group into action to say, here's where we're at, here's what the base case will be, and then we're going to drive down our greenhouse gas emissions to reach what we think is going to be an ambitious but a reachable goal. And through this iterative process, we landed at 3.0 as our 2050 goal for greenhouse gas emissions. And here you see in what we like to call our wedge graph how that breaks down into more energy efficient buildings using district energy and combined heat and power, known as CHP. Essentially implementing our transportation, master transportation plan in the next sector, and then lastly including and increasing renewable energy throughout Arlington County. That would drive us from 13.4 down to 3.0 by 2050. And so that modeling process, once again, was an iterative process, and after we gave them a goal of 4.5 and they said, no, go back to your model and bring it down to 3.0, it allowed us then to finalize that graph. There are many different ways that we understand you can cut energy issues. We decided to go and cut it into 6 different areas. We call them our goal areas. These are the first 3, and these are the goals themselves. They're not numeric by design. We decided to break up our 2 documents, our community energy plan and our implementation framework, in such a way that our plan has goals and policies, and it's the policy level that the county board adopted that we chose to be much more specific and numeric, and I'll offer an example slide of that to show you how a goal differs from a policy in our plan. But our goals are more overarching, and our policies are where you drive down and you get into the more numeric, measurable aspects of our plan. And then the implementation framework contains strategies to help implement those policies and reach the goals, as well as tools, which are the more day-to-day actions to help us reach those goals through implementation of policies. So with buildings, increase the energy efficiency and operational efficiency of those buildings, to recognize that, and this is important for developers, it's not all on the developers to create really highly energy efficient buildings. We recognize that the buildings are going to have better equipment, better fenestration qualities, and so forth to increase the energy efficiency. But also, it's important that the operations of that building through end user operations has to be improved. And that gets into some of the education, human behavior part of our plan. District energy, I've mentioned before, linking 2 or more buildings together to share a resource. That resource is hot water that's distributed and cold water distributed underneath the Arlington streets, and going ahead and sharing that resource to heat and cool buildings. And by doing that and combining it with combined heat and power, we ramp up our efficiencies from around 35% to about 80%. And then over in Copenhagen, they have one system over there, the premier plant, we'll call it, at 90% efficiency. It's a great goal to strive for. And also, in your earlier slide, you showed some of the common goals, and I didn't see district energy in there. We don't have a district energy system currently in Arlington County, and we thought if we're going to go ahead and reach our goals and do it in as a economically feasible way as possible, we thought the district energy was an important part of this. It also lends itself to the energy security part of what we're trying to accomplish, as well as the economic and environmental. So district energy was a key part of this as well. Renewable energy, doing the increasing our renewable energy, both in terms of photovoltaics, but also looking at other forms such as solar hot water as a way to go ahead and increase the renewable energy footprint here in Arlington County. The other 3 goals that are in our community energy plan regard transportation. Once again, our master transportation plan leading the way for us. The county government actions, and this is where we look at, there's a core team here in the program that I work with the AIR team. We are up front and center of working on this on a daily basis, but it's also recognizing that through almost like an ISO 14001 or 5001 sort of construct, we want to reach out to all the various departments, find out where they have touch points regarding energy issues, and helping them to do in their everyday activities, integrate and weave the community energy plan goals and activities into their everyday work. And so that's part of the county government actions. Education and human behavior, that goal area actually started out as education and outreach, and one of our task force members ended up coming to us and said, why are we saying outreach? What are we trying to accomplish with this goal area? We're trying to change human behavior at the end of the day. And so that made sense to us, and we said, well, let's just say what it is. And so we changed the goal area title to help people understand really what we're trying to accomplish here. And as you note here with the descriptor, it's to change personal action and allow each and every person to do their part on helping the community reach its goals. Now, I mentioned with goals, we do have the policies, and here's an example under the buildings goal area. We have 3 policies that will help us to reach the overall goal of making buildings more energy efficient and increasing their operational efficiency as well. And so we break it down into residential, non-residential buildings, and then also taking into account source versus site energy is our 3rd policy there. And so not in every single policy do we have the numbers to back up where we're trying to achieve our goals. But in many instances, you will find in our policies that's where the numbers come in, and that's where the essence of the modeling plays out. Then lastly, I do mention there's a community energy plan, which is part of our comprehensive plan, and then an implementation framework was also approved by the county board as an administrative guide for staff to implement the community energy plan. And in this document is where we have our strategies and tools to help us to move forward. Once again, these strategies and tools are designed to help us implement those policies, as well as to, on a day-to-day basis, use our tools to reach our goals and to do this on a more daily basis. And so one last thing I do want to mention that was noted in the earlier presentation, or part of the presentation, was that metrics are on our to-do list. And as part of our implementation framework, it was to finalize metrics and indicators, and those metrics and indicators are going to be finalized in the coming months, and they're going to be revolving around those 3 lenses of economic competitiveness, energy supply security, and environmental commitment. And that way we'll be able to report out on a regular basis and a standardized basis. This is what we mean by those 3 lenses, and this is what we plan to accomplish, and here's how we're doing so far. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to stay on for any questions, but thank you once again for your time.
Thank you so much, Rich. I really appreciate it. Really helpful insight into your broader approach, but also, you know, into some of the ways that you went about calibrating those goals and coming up with those targets.